Welcome back to Leadership Blueprints, everybody. If you are a project leader, this episode is for you. I had a conversation recently with a former CEO of a mega AE firm, and he said that our industry is not prepared to deliver the level of leadership that is required for the number of billion-dollar programs that we have coming over the next 10 years. And if you're an aspiring project executive, if you are currently a office engineer or a project engineer or a project manager, I think that you're going to get something out of this. Most important is if you are what we like to call a project champion or a program champion or an agency champion on the agency or owner side that is responsible for figuring out what team is going to come on and help you deliver a billion-dollar program. I think you're going to learn something today. So excited to dig in with my colleagues here, Brian Pieplo and Michael Furman. Brian is the Chief Project Development Officer at MCFA and Principal Planner. Michael Furman, the MCF of MCFA, is the founder and also a Principal Planner with us. And they are actually on the speaking circuit right now, fresh off of
book tour,
fresh off of the New Jersey Transaction Conference, a transportation conference down in AC this week, and headed to JETSI and the
APA, American Planning Association.
American Planning Association. So coming to a audience near you, they recently released a book that we had a podcast about last year, Make No Little Plans, a planning as project development approach to building infrastructure. Since that book was released, we've had a couple of different conversations, a couple of different client interactions around programs, and I think some lessons learned that we just wanted to kind of chit chat about as they're out there talking to the industry. So, Michael, Brian, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So I think I want to start with, what was the audience most interested in at the Transaction Conference?
I think understanding the importance of a champion in moving projects forward. Everyone understands you need a champion, but truly to understand how that works and why it's so important to have, we kind of pressed on that button many, many times in our conversation yesterday.
Let's go there, because I've often talked about project development in the public space, large or institutional space, even large infrastructure projects, large campus programs. There's a bunch of different stakeholders. Unlike a real estate development project where there's really a primary stakeholder is the developer that has a bunch of capital pressure on them. In the public and institutional space, delays and this whole stakeholder collaboration, cooperation tends to sometimes slow things down if you don't have that project champion. And I think from your experience and from our kind of studies, we've seen that when there is a project champion who is really the cheerleader and the sponsor and the vision and the leader that's driving a program forward, you're more likely to have success. I think that leader has to have some level of support around them. And I think MCFA, what we like to do is be that support and kind of complement that champion. Or if the champion's not quite ready to take that role, help get them ready to step into that role and understand, how do you communicate vision? How do you drive the project? Bri, you came up with the 3 A's.
Okay.
Let's dig into the 3 A's of a project champion.
Well, so, and yesterday you asked about how the session went. We do actually walk through our DNA workshop planning tool.
Yep.
And gave everybody copies of this and the kind of questions you go through, basically to try and have everybody become a project champion.
Yeah.
And how do you give that level of kind of ownership and accountability to, making a project actually happen, that it does take a team. So the other thing, that we've learned, obviously, since we wrote the book, and Michael and I have a real project example that's happening because of it, is that key project champion or owner or sponsor also has to have 3 kind of key things to be a project accelerator.
Okay.
So they have to have the ability to execute the project, either financial resources, able to expedite state permits or acquire land on behalf of a project or an owner or interest. They have to also have the attitude that they want to do it, they can do, they're organized around to make things happen, get projects built. And they also have to have the aptitude. They have to have skill sets, either amongst their staff, somebody who's leading the project within their organization, and have team members like MCFA and others who are also behind them, bringing that aptitude or those capabilities. So Michael and I had a project example, which for about, 5-6 years or so, we were trying to help the Army develop a key research facility in partnership with industry and academia. And we didn't have, or the Avenue was an academic institution that didn't really have those project accelerator characteristics. And we pivoted and found an agency and an organization, in this case, a state economic development corp, that did have all those key characteristics. And now the project is rocketing forward and moving forward. So that was a key differentiator. So if we do a second version of the book, we're really going to talk about that need for a project accelerator. And we have Accelerate as our final step in the Discover, Navigate, Accelerate project as planning as project development process. But even more important than ever now, we're really realizing that accelerator is so important.
It's so important to have the champion, the ability, right? We talked about the ability to accelerate is a big deal. It's everything. Because projects are going to have ups and downs. It lives, it dies 17 times a week sometimes. But having that fortitude and the aptitude and the attitude, kind of get up every day, move a little bit forward every day to get the project there.
I want to dig into two pieces. One is we're putting this book out there to Brian's point. We want to encourage the entire industry to take on this mindset, because the world will be better, projects will be better, taxpayers will be served better if we inspire more leadership in the industry and give everybody the tools. If knowledge was the key to success, I think it's Derek Sivers that said this, if knowledge was the key to success, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs. The role of consultants in helping execute, facilitate, maybe color outside of the lines a bit when an organization, they may have some level of bureaucracy or institutional inertia pushing back against that champion. Talk to me about the ability for us as third parties and industry partners as third parties to kind of help connect dots that maybe somebody internal to an organization that they can't see. I think, outside partners and public-public partnerships, public-private partnerships, maybe even interdepartmental partnerships in certain institutions. Sometimes when you connect those dots, all of a sudden you bring a sponsor and maybe an integrator, or you've got somebody that has a vision and you have somebody that can complement. Recently, I was talking about Roy Disney to the Walt Disney when they were building Disneyland, and Walt had the vision and was driving, and he was going to make it happen, and Roy was trying to figure out, how are we going to keep this thing going with money? Talk to me about how we morph ourselves into the gaps that an organization might have to complement that visionary or that integrator and be a part of their leadership team.
I think it's important that we have many, many decades of experience seeing large mega projects through, from planning to commissioning to opening to ribbon cutting, right? So we've been there. So we have the bona fides to actually sit next to a champion and actually share with them the experiences. We sometimes can see things that they don't see from the outside, like this organization or that organization. We can bring to them, hey, it takes 30 people to say yes. It takes one person to say no. And sometimes you need to know who that one person that can say no is and how to bring them onto the team. And having that experience, been through it before, and being, having the scars and everything, it really helps us to help the champion, basically help the champion move forward, basically. To say, hey, this could happen, that could happen, this could happen, this could happen, that could happen, right? And you talked about coloring outside the line. Sometimes a third party within an organization can color outside the line and kind of protect and buffer the internal champion.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Beach, build on what Michael's saying. I mean, the reason Discover is the first part of Discover, Navigate, Accelerate is really, even take a hard look in the mirror. Are we doing the right project as an agency? and then navigate is, are we doing the project right? And we walked through yesterday live fire example of a DNA planning workshop where you really do a self-assessment within your organization. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges? What are we trying to do? Who benefits and who's harmed by the action? And not only who the advocates are, but also who the adversaries are, and having a clear understanding of that, and what's nice about what we can do is we bring that outside the organization perspective. Because, as you've talked with a lot of leaders on your podcast series before, sometimes you get stuck in the inertia and the internal mindset and organizational groupthink. And, it's important to take a step back. And obviously that serves an organization well to have structure and accountability and, low risk tolerance and all that. But again, are we doing the right project even? And what are the objectives we're trying to achieve? And are, we really maximizing the ways to achieve and optimize those objectives, in a cost and time efficient manner? That takes courage sometimes. So, one of the things, we do, we called it like a group psychology session or so too. Kind of yesterday, even with the group, there were AE professionals and they were agency owners and chief engineers. Let's all help each other with this because it's important. I mean, and that's the other thing. We kind of lay down the call to action like we do in the book. This stuff matters. And we've got to do it, and we've got to do it right.
I want to get to what you mean by this stuff matters. Before I do that, I want to make a book recommendation. It was handed to me by Michael Furman, like week 1 at MCFA, Getting Naked by Patrick Lencioni. And the ability, and this is a challenge to industry, if you are in any way, shape, or form an advisor to an owner, an agency, or champion, it really sheds light on the practice of being a high-value consultant and being sometimes the fall man for an agency to take a little bit of a risk, or for that leader to take a little bit of risk. You can be the counterpoint or the murder board to the organization's current inertia as the outside, be the bad guy, but really be the one that's willing to say something that maybe somebody else thought at some point in time, but break that group think up. I really challenge our industry because our public leaders, they have a ton of responsibility on their plate. A lot of chief engineers have ongoing operational risk that they're managing on a day-to-day, keeping the organization, keeping the mission, keeping the buses running, for example. In their ability to execute and lead a project with a total wide aperture of what the options are, where are the obstacles. They're hiring us for that. They're not just hiring us to draw a line on a piece of paper or to design. They're hiring us to help them figure out what's the right project, what's the realm of the possible, what are the right courses of action. And I think that early discover phase is where we help lay that out so that everybody can get on board. And hopefully you've identified whether they're human risks, whether they're stakeholder risks, whether they're financial risks, whether they're environmental risks.
And usually projects have all those.
All of them. But you at least identify and understand early on. There was a study, I wish I had it, Matt Handel told me about it. I wish I could bring it up right now, but the biggest responsibility or the biggest concern of most project leaders in the public space is managing risk. And here, let me go back to the idea of the developer. The real estate developer is taking risks for a financial return. A public leader, they are not incentivized by any upside. They are incentivized by protecting the public, protecting the taxpayer's investment, and back to the idea of running operations, protecting cars driving over bridges or passengers getting on trains or planes. To me, that sheds light on like they have a ton of risk on their plate. So they may have a more narrow aperture of how things can go. Not that they should be taking crazy risks, but they should understand what risks they can take at what phase of what stage of a project, and then how do you manage them? How do you mitigate them? how do you maybe accept them? So I go back to the Patrick Lencioni book. Us, industry, I'm talking to you, project leaders, aspiring project leaders, engineers, planners out there on projects. You're not just there to do the technical job. You are there to understand that owner's view, that mission's view, and help advise that owner.
Helping the owner and the champion be comfortable with the word no.
Yeah.
Right. In a bureaucracy that's inward facing, you're going to get a lot of no's, right? Because of risk, there's a lot of risk, right? And they're risk intolerant, right? So helping them know where their no's are coming from, be prepared for the no's, and helping them come back with how yes or why yes.
Yeah.
Right now we can do this as opposed to that. But again, the chief engineer is all about risk and how do you alleviate that and make them very comfortable, right, with the word no.
Yeah.
We also talked yesterday, particularly with the group, about, discover, navigate, accelerate is not necessarily a linear process, but it's iterative.
Totally.
So like the example we used as a live fire example to do a DNA workshop, the project's in the middle of a project phase. What's working, what isn't, why, what are the challenges? So, discover doesn't mean just right at the beginning of the project, but continue to discover as you're going along. And I think I saw a lot of people, the aha light bulbs go on over people's heads. It's like, oh yeah. And cause things change.
Yep.
Markets change, requirements change,
Technology changes.
transit commuting patterns change,
Political
work patterns change,
pictures change.
administrations change, funding priorities change. So, that's a constant in life and in the world. And a lot of these major infrastructure projects have 20-year or more development cycles. So,
For sure.
You can imagine the change. And that's why, again, are we doing the right project? That may have been the right project 20 years ago.
Right.
Or 10 years ago. And are we doing the project right the way we would have done it 10 years ago and initially planned or programmed? May or may not be the right approach now. And we should revisit that and should have the courage to revisit that.
It takes a lot of courage for a champion. And like we were doing this way for 10 years. Why are we going to change? Well,
Right.
Sometimes you have to change.
We understand it. Political or administrative snapshots in time, the inertia that went into getting a project going, we certainly identify with all of those pain points, and the understanding that these projects, between EISs and studies and demographic shifts, all of that have an impact on why projects are being executed. I want to go back to what you said, that like what we're talking about matters. Sure, we serve Department of Defense and some research and development missions inside of the DoD, transportation agencies that are literally the backbone of our economy, moving people and products all over the place. These missions, these billion-dollar investments that we're making, I even get into the private side of data centers. These are what enable business and commerce to happen. What would you say to the leaders out there that are either in these roles or stepping into these roles about understanding like this is really, really important stuff?
I think understanding your personal passions and goals and interests is also very important because, we talked about this even yesterday too, is fortitude. You have to have fortitude. You have to have a backbone and a spine because you're going to have to stand up to a lot of pressures. Because, if there's $1 billion investment, there's going to be a lot of interest in that $1 billion investment, good, bad, and otherwise. And, having the tenacity and the ability to persevere and stay the course, and on the right course. And again, courage, for that. You've defined in a number of your podcast series different qualities of leaders and all. And that courage, and tenacity, and have to have the faith in yourself and your team, to deliver the right project and deliver the project right. It's going to be, I think, absolutely critical. And you're not rewarded for that typically in an agency structure.
Totally.
So in fact, sometimes, it's the no good deed goes unpunished kind of reaction. So, you have to, have that fortitude in yourself. And your team has to be, helping you with that.
Yeah.
Power that. I think.
Michael?
Multi-generational projects are not easy and not for the faint of heart. They aren't. And hey, some folks aren't cut out for it, right? Some folks are followers. But when you get the right leader with the right project, addressing the right problem set, you can just see it's going to happen. Because we can see the projects we're working on now. There's 2 projects. It's going to happen, and they're going to get built. And success has 1,000 fathers. And there's nothing more enjoyable than sitting at a groundbreaking in the back of the field with the project champion who's not at the dais, not with the governor or the senator, right? Or the commanding general. We're just sitting back there, just like, yep, job well done.
Yeah, you made it happen.
He made it happen. A multi-generational that's going to serve tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. It's really, I mean, you have to want to do that. You have to feel the weight of the investment, the weight of what's going on.
I have one more challenge to industry. The way that leader has a backbone is facts and figures, that we've thought hard about this, that we know why we're doing this. The more you invest in that discover phase, the more honesty that comes out in that discover phase, the stronger that leader is positioned to have the confidence to stand up and say, time out. Why are we doing it this way? My team and I have relooked at this, and I know nobody wants to hear this, but ... I want to go back to the DNA. Discover, navigate, accelerate. Walk us through that process. I know we spent a lot of time, or not a lot, but a good amount of time on that whole idea of acceleration. But we know that the upfront discover phase is where we really understand what is it that we're trying to do? Why are we trying to do it? Walk us through the phases. Bri, you have your DNA double helix, understanding the financials, understanding the missions, understanding the facilities or infrastructure. Talk us through that.
Probably the best thing to do is to think about what it isn't. It isn't, magic. It takes work, and it isn't just starting, from zero. So every project has a history backlog. So discover starts with, okay, what's been working, what hasn't, what's driving the needs for the project, who benefits, who's harmed, et cetera. And so we actually walk through in our conference sessions that we're doing live fire examples, so people actually really understand it.
Yeah.
We give out for free this DNA workshop workbook. It's 12 questions that you walk through all phases of, and it's applicable to any phase of a project, whether it's just beginning or mid phase. So that discover phase is really you're setting the table.
We'll hyperlink that in the notes, by the way.
Awesome. The navigate phase is really where the magic happens. What are the course of action alternatives, pros and cons? What are the KPIs or metrics we're evaluating against? What does success look like? How are we achieving success? Can we achieve more success? Can we do more with less? What are alternative funding and finance? So that's a big part of what we believe in the DNA too, because as you know, we tend to take a business analytics approach to all projects as well, not just the technical architecture and engineering and planning approach. And then of course, accelerate, we've had a lot of discussion today about that. That's where the magic kind of happens. Okay, how can we move things along faster, further, more, get more for less, and do more? But in the book, we do talk about a number of inaction examples of how the DNA process really helped.
Yeah.
And really, how we kind of came out to map that whole DNA process and what does it mean and how, and the key part about the book and the workshop pamphlet is we want everybody to be able to do this and understand this and do it well, because the world's a better place. The industry will be better than that. So
totally,
that's our call to action.
One comment I wanted to make on the discover is owners, agencies, teams, they already know a lot about how they do business. They already have some gripes or they know what they're trying to do. Sometimes it's just us pulling it out of them in a safe environment where it's like, hey, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And we can just come into that discover phase and then set you on your way. Sometimes just being that third party is all you need. We touched on entrepreneurial operating system before we got on the show. EOS is I'm talking again to public leaders. I'm not an entrepreneur. That's not for me. The EOS process does two things. One, it reminds you that a team is what's accomplishing the mission. And in business, that mission may be growing the business. In the AEC, in the built environment, it may be executing the project. you know that you need a leader, but in EOS, we talk a lot about leadership teams and the visionary and the integrator. And I think that MCFA is good at both balancing the vision or the integrator, depending on what that champion's strengths are. Sometimes that champion is very operational and understands, and they just need a little bit brighter picture, a little bit more vision. Sometimes they just need a little bit more structure to help them take this concept or vision in their head and execute. We actually were inspired a little bit by the EOS process because it is iterative. It forces a leadership team to look at what they're trying to accomplish quarterly. What are the key things we need to accomplish this quarter? And how do we continue moving that back so that we can get focused, but we don't become blind to our own momentum or ignore some outside shift in the environment? So I would encourage anybody that's a public leader, this EOS may not be in your vernacular, EOS may not sound like it's for you, but we took a lot of the concepts from what we learned in EOS running our business and realize we can apply these at the project team level. And that is some of the inspiration behind the DNA process. So even if that sounds of interest to you, to just exhale once a quarter and get that third-party perspective, get your team in the front of a whiteboard and figure out, like, why are we stuck right now? Why do I feel like the projects or the to-do list keeps getting bigger and the problems keep growing instead of moving things forward? Any comments that we missed? Any takeaways from the sessions yesterday? You're like burning to hit here.
All the points we covered today are applicable to a champion. But again, I reiterate, having the right champion, having the right person in place and the right team is everything. And sometimes, like you said, Beej, sometimes just having the champion exhale, right? My head hurts. Are you banging against the wall? Every day. You probably should stop doing that, right? And suddenly a new perspective changes everything.
Yeah.
Right? Being directionally correct, right? What do they say? Perfect's the enemy of good enough.
Yeah.
Right? And agency champions, because they're so risk adverse, right? Like sometimes forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one takeaway too, and Michael and I are doing this live with a customer we currently are working with, is the importance of the project charter, setting the tone and using DNA to help develop a strong project charter where you really are, almost every major project, mega project has a charter, but it's done at the beginning and then people forget about it and put it on the shelf.
Check the block.
And a project charter, defines all these things, these roles and responsibilities and risks and stakeholders and processes and approach, so that, and a key thing we talked about yesterday was really at the session was not saying, okay, now we've done that. We need to use that very important document and keep refreshing it as the project goes along. A lot of teams don't refresh their risk registers or monitor their risk registers. And, all those things, you've spent the time and energy on these tools, and DNA can really help you develop and keep refining and improve those tools as the project goes along. So there was a lot of, again, I literally saw light bulbs over people's heads in the rooms. That was very exciting because, we want everybody to be successful at this, because we can get real results. And, the whole purpose behind the book was, to build project champions, to build better outcomes for everybody in the industry and the agencies and the customers we work with.
And
sure.
The project charter, 2, 3, 4 years down when a project's getting executed, you don't want to be constantly recreating the genius of the moment. Why did we do that? Who did that? Why did that happen? A project charter that's monitored, refreshed quarterly, yearly is so important because, again, these projects are a long time coming. Who made that call? Why do we do this?
Well, and project teams change along the way too. So again, that's your good reference document to go back to.
I think that's a great point, that all of these best practices and project leadership certainly benefits from the PMP and those best practices. But They're not blocks to be checked at the beginning of the project and put on the shelf. They're living, breathing documents that maybe it is in that quarterly revisit. We revisit these key documents to just remind ourselves, what are we here for? What do we sign up for? We know that personalities take over. We know that people move on and off of projects, so the players change. And that inertia, the best way to, from my perspective, the best way to kind of give yourself a gut check on that inertia is taking those quarterly checks. I'm going to close this out. Again, the book is Make No Little Plans. Remind us, you're going to be at JETSI.
The American Planning Association.
JETSI's out in
Portland.
So JETSI is the Society of American Military Engineers Joint Engineers Training Conference.
There you go.
Portland, 19 to 22 May or so. And the National American Planning Association Conference in Detroit here and around, I think, 27 or 28 April or so. So having a session. And, we tailor, obviously, the kind of key points to the audiences that are there, again, to make it even the most relevant. But the same basic message and call to action.
So if you're at either of those conferences, look up our session, look up these guys, meet them in person. And if you haven't gotten the book already, I'm going to close out with the end of Duke DeLuca's introduction. It's this simple. If you like winning, if you like accomplishing meaningful and relevant work, read this book. It will help you win. And when you do, you will revel, as I have, in achieving the Thomas the Tank Engine vision of true personal value and excellence. You will be a, quote, really useful engine. So that's Brigadier General retired Duke DeLuca. We at MCFA get the privilege of working side by side some unbelievably entrepreneurial public leaders. A lot of us have been in public service. A lot of us have worked side by side public service. Public servants, we know how hard your job is. We know how important your work is. If we can do anything to help you, or if we can point you in the right direction, it would be our pleasure to get on a call and help out. So please do that. Industry partners, if this is of value to you, get in touch with us, or just grab the book and download the workbook. I think this is not about MCFA being the linchpin to the success of the industry. This is about all of us figuring out better ways to help our public leaders navigate what is a very complex and challenging future. And I will tell you that it's the number one way to anti-AI yourself. There may be parts and pieces of our industry that are handed over and commoditized to technology or Grok or ChatGPT. Leadership is never going to be that. The human component of understanding all of these different parts and pieces of risk and human interactions and stakeholder positions and advocates and adversaries of projects. It's just too complicated. It's a human business. So we challenge you as technical professionals to continue growing in your consulting approach and in your leadership philosophy. Till next time, thanks for everything you do. Have a great week and a great weekend.